Number 25, we got Louisville, and I don't look at power ratings a whole lot, but I guarantee you, if Louisville was power rated, they'd be rated higher than 25th. I think this is a pretty solid football team, especially offensively. Kind of flex their muscles defensively against Clemson, so maybe that's a new side of Louisville for the 2024 season that we've yet to see. But this team has taken some losses from some really good football teams, some teams that are in it to win it for the college football playoff: Notre Dame, Miami. So this is a 3-loss team here, but we're getting to the point in the season where it's like, okay, who your losses to are really, really starting to matter more and more as we get closer to the end of the season here. And Louisville's got some good losses, and they've got a good win over Clemson as well. So there's Louisville, the I think the lone 3-loss team in this college in our top 25 ranking. So
well, outside of South Carolina.
Outside of South Carolina, that's true. Where do we have? Okay, I see South Carolina now. We got them at 19. We'll go ahead and talk about South Carolina since we're talking about them now. We just talked about it in our last video. It's really a darn shame that South Carolina wasn't able to pull out one of those games against LSU or Alabama. Had them both on the ropes. You could blame some refereeing, some umpiring on the LSU loss possibly, if that's your thing. But there's no doubt about it. South Carolina should have beat LSU, had multiple opportunities to beat Alabama, and wasn't able to get that done on the road at Alabama, mind you. That was a 2-point loss there. So I think South Carolina is a very underrated football team as far as everybody's perception of them nationally. I think they're very good. All right, kind of jumping back over towards the bottom of this list. Missouri just kind of hanging in there. We got them at 24. They don't play really any consequential, role. I don't think the rest of the season. I guess they got a game against one of the ranked teams. I can't remember who it was, but maybe I'm wrong on that. The back end of the schedule or the schedule in general for Missouri has just been really disappointing. And the games that they did have that were big games, they lost them, miserably. So with that being said, Missouri, I don't even know if they're actually a top 25 team, but they got 2 losses, and that's just kind of how these things work out, right? They're not the only one that's had an easy schedule on this list, I can promise you. Iowa State loses again. They're right on the verge of dropping out of the top 25. I get you could argue dropping them out of the top 25, honestly, because what was their good win, right? Was it Iowa? I think Iowa was one of their best wins of the season, right? So, kind of running out of reasons to have Iowa State ranked, to be quite honest with you. Arizona State, I think we're going to be sitting here saying that next week, as Arizona State's going to be matching up against Kansas State this week. That doesn't look like a good outcome coming up for Arizona State. We'll talk about that game here shortly. But Arizona State's got 2 losses, guys. So I mean, that's where we're at. They've won some games, and they beat Kansas earlier this season. They've got a couple of decent little wins, but nothing really crazy to write home about, I guess. Washington State still with 1 loss. They win again this past weekend against Utah State, who is not very good. Washington State, I said it earlier this year in the top 25. You've won the Pac-2. Congratulations. Army, what's going on with Army, man? I meant to kind of mention them in our reaction show. All of a sudden, Army is struggling the last couple of weeks. Now, not this past week against North Texas, but the week before, there was a little bit of an excuse for it, right? Bryson Daly is out. So you think, okay, well, it was still kind of a ho-hum victory. And then they go play North Texas this week, and Bryson Daly does play. He runs the ball a bajillion times. I can't even remember. I swear, I think I read he ran it 36 times in that game. I'm not sure what's going on there. During that game, I saw where he had only thrown it once, and it was on into the game a little ways. So I don't think he threw it around a whole lot. Already talked about South Carolina, Clemson. Clemson has disappointed every time they've had a big game, I guess, really. They're going to have some big games kind of here at the end of the season. We'll see what Clemson's able to do as far as squeaking their way towards Charlotte. Kansas State. And by the way, Clemson, they don't control their own destiny, by the way. So they're going to need help, and they're going to need big help. They're going to need it now. But with that being said, they're still kind of hanging around with a couple of losses there. Kansas State, kind of the same thing. This team's been pretty inconsistent, Mason. But the loss to BYU looks more and more reasonable week by week, right? So I feel like some of these teams, you lose to a team, right? As a fan base, you lose to a team, and then you kind of find yourself a couple weeks later, like, well, I hope they beat so and so, so that makes us look better. And that's kind of what's happened to Kansas State as far as the BYU loss there. And the other loss there to Arizona, that one didn't make any sense at all. So there's kind of the inconsistencies baked in there. Colorado, we talked about them last video. They're surging. Texas A&M kind of laying idle. We're going to know a lot about Texas A&M by the end of the season, guys. If they can figure out a way to host Texas and beat Texas, then that's going to really shake things up for the college football playoff. Georgia, very disappointing offensively this past week. Defense continues to do what they do, but that ain't enough in this past week's matchup. The offense leaves the team out to dry, and it finally bit the dogs in the butt, right? Well, it bit the dogs in the butt for a second time. Boise State, we talked about it. They kind of scooted by, I guess you could say, against Nevada. Double O in the comment section was saying in the last video they turned the ball over some. I think they did actually get a couple of turnovers as well from Nevada, but only a 7-point win there. It's just win at this point. If you're Boise State, it doesn't matter. You don't need style points. You just need to win. Just keep winning, and this team's good at that, right? They're good at spreading the ball around offensively. Jeanty got his 200. So there's your Ashton Jeanty Heisman update. He got another 200 yards, and his numbers are continuing to look historic. Miami drops to Georgia Tech. We talked about that in the reaction video, man. Miami's defense, kind of the opposite of Georgia. Miami's defense finally bites them in the butt as Georgia Tech is able to possess the ball to the point where Miami isn't able to put enough drives together that score points, and they drop a game to Georgia Tech there on the road in Atlanta at Bobby Dodd Stadium. Not words that I have uttered a whole lot, but Georgia Tech with the upset at Bobby Dodd. And then Ole Miss at number 11. Ole Miss, the season is so long, guys. If you would have looked at that Ole Miss loss to Kentucky, you would have been like, oh, man, this is just another one of those team of mercenaries that gives up from one week to another. Ole Miss look better this past week than what I've seen them look defensively throughout the whole season. They look just as good here in week 11 as they did early in the season. So I think Ole Miss, while they kind of had a little bit of a lull, caught a couple of losses there in the middle of the schedule, seems like maybe they're gathering some momentum and some traction headed towards the postseason. There's 11 through 25. What do you think about those guys, Mason?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. Looking at this slate here, I think Colorado's a team that could be surging here late. They're definitely in the Big 12 race, so I could see them kind of jumping up here towards the end of the season. This is really just a group of teams that have some big wins, but then also have some losses that you kind of scratch your head about. And you want to rank them higher because of those big wins, namely like Georgia over Texas, but Georgia's got 2 losses as well. You look at Ole Miss and you think, well, they should be in the top 10 after that win this week, right? Well, not so much, because they've lost to LSU and Kentucky so far this year. So kind of some ups and downs throughout the season. That's just been this 2024 season in a nutshell, really, when you look at it. But I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I see Double O'Neill saying, Boise should be higher. Their only loss came to a 3-point loss to Oregon, number 1 team in the country, and I totally get that. I don't really have a good argument for that. When you look at teams like Notre Dame and Miami, which are the 2 that he referenced, having losses to unranked teams. I totally get that. But who has Boise State beat? I guess is the better question. When you look at that, you can't just look at quality losses. You also have to look at who they've beaten, and their schedule doesn't allow for them to play a top 25 team and win in on a week to week basis, I guess I should say. But make no doubt about it. Boise State wins. They're in the college football playoff. I think that when you look at comparing that number 12 slot to maybe a top 10 slot, is there going to be a whole lot of a difference there? I'm not so sure. Other than hosting a playoff game, I mean, I think that Boise State's in right now, and that's about all you can ask for from this team given their schedule.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just not. I mean, look, I like Boise State. Don't get me wrong. I like Boise State, and I think they're the best, non-Power Four team in football right now. But I'm not ready to put, it. Okay, let's put it like this. And I don't really care. You can throw the eye test out the window because that's what you're doing anyway by having this conversation. Because obviously Miami looks better than Boise State, right? To the eye. But let's compare. Say Georgia beats Tennessee, goes undefeated the rest of the season, and then Boise State is, of course, going to go undefeated the rest of the season because they don't really play anybody the rest of the season. Who's over who? Georgia beats a Tennessee and a Texas, and Boise State has beat who? You know what I'm saying? Like nobody in the right mind is putting Boise State ahead of Georgia. That's not happening in that scenario. So I don't know. I mean, I like Boise State just as much as anybody, but I just got to see. Um, I gotta see some wins, and it's not Boise State's fault. Double O put in the comment section. All they did was beat who they put in front of them, and I agree with that sentiment 100%. I do. That's all you can do. Boise State don't get to pick their whole schedule, and they've been impressive. But I think they're going to hover around that 10 to 12 spot, and we're going to have some more. We're going to have some more clarity in this top 12, and I think that's when Boise State kind of slides their way up into that 11, 12, 11 or 12 spot there and makes their way to the playoff. All right, let's keep going. Penn State at number 10. Talk about not having a good win. That's where Penn State's at right this second. They don't really have a good win to hang their hat on, but they've only got one loss, right? And it's a good loss. If there's one team I could argue to take out of this, it would be Penn State, right? Because I just not a big believer in this Penn State team. I've got eyeballs. I just don't feel like Penn State's offense is an offense that's going to be going to the playoff and scoring enough points to win a playoff game. I just don't see that happening. Depends on the matchup, right? But Penn State, one loss, and they're just kind of they don't control their own destiny, right? They need some help. They need a lot of help. Alabama, number 9. Alabama is looking like they're playing their best football right now. And if Jalen Milroe is able to run the football to half the production that he did this past weekend, watch out. Just absolutely watch out because he's a deadly runner, man. Absolutely deadly runner. And the more he attracts attention that way, the easier it is for him to be able to pass in this offense. And still need to get those running backs going, though, Mason. He's going to need some help. It's a long postseason. And, Jalen Milroe, obviously, the more you run, the more you risk of getting hurt. And Alabama's going to need some help from those running backs going forward. But all in all, overall victory, it was just resounding for Alabama. All facets of the game were played well. Got to tip your cap to DeBoer. A lot of noise going on in Tuscaloosa. A lot of turmoil in T-Town with a couple of losses and expectations through the roof as Nick Saban moves on. Just total credit to DeBoer and company to be able to get that done. Number 8, SMU, man. This SMU offense is something else, and we're going to talk about it here in a little bit. Statistically, we'll look at some of the stats for them. They're not as flashy as maybe some of the best top ranked teams in the country offensively, but they're getting it done. They're scoring lots of points. SMU is going to be tough to deal with. Right now, it feels like Miami and SMU are the two teams that are making their way to the ACC championship game. I don't really see any reason to feel differently about that. And if that is the case, we're going to see some serious fireworks. I don't know what the over under will be in that game, but boy, it's going to have to be in the 60s at least. I would imagine mid 60s, maybe Mason. That's going to be a fireworks show. I'm pretty sure if we can get that game in Charlotte, which I think we will. Notre Dame continues to just do what they need to do week in and week out. Right? They've been pretty steady throughout the season. They did have the one bad loss early in the season to NIU, and ever since then they've just pretty much curb stomped everybody they've played. Going into halftime this past weekend, it was a little bit, you know, I was worried about that actually in that game. Florida State's rush defense is the best thing on their team right this second, and Notre Dame is a rushing team. So naturally, in the first half, um, there wasn't enough time for Notre Dame to be able to wear down that defense and be productive running the football. And in the second half, it was a totally different story. This is a great rushing team by Notre Dame. It's a really good defense. There are NFL players on this team, right? This is one of those rosters where you look at it and you think, or you look at this team and you think, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. It's a pretty doggone good football team, man. And it's going to take somebody with a really good defensive line, really good front seven to be able to stop Notre Dame because they eat up clock and they run that football and they do it well. BYU at number 6. BYU is just a well-rounded football team at this point. I mean, and they're clutch. Even when they have a bad game, like they did this past weekend, I would consider that to be a bad game, at least for the front part of it. They're able to hit a drive in the fourth quarter to win that sucker, man. BYU's got a horseshoe up their butt, or they've got favor, or whatever you want to call it. They're blessed, whatever you want to call it, man. They're just hard to stop this year, and that's just plain and simple. What do you think about 6 through 10?
Yeah, I mean, I think BYU is kind of heading towards an upset. I don't know if it's going to come this regular season or if it might come in the Big 12 championship game. But at some point, I have a feeling that BYU does get upset. Maybe it's to Colorado or a team like that. They're in the Big 12 championship, but the BYU has showed me that they're a team that really relies on turning the football over, getting those takeaways and, poor quarterback play and things like that. I don't really know if what BYU is doing is sustainable, but they are undefeated, so they deserve to be in the top 10 nonetheless. Notre Dame is probably a team that you would have in your top 5 from a power ranking perspective, but that NIU loss just is a huge blemish, and credit them for playing as sound as they have since that loss. To get themselves into a top 10 position and put themselves in the college football playoff conversation. I expect them to continue to win and make it to the college football playoff. SMU is a team now that you have to look at with Miami going down and saying, hey, this is the front runner in the ACC. I definitely do think that SMU could beat Miami in a matchup in Charlotte if we get that game. But got to take care of the rest of their schedule. They certainly can't afford to sleepwalk through these last 3 games. I think that SMU, though, will get it done and make it to Charlotte. And then at that point, I mean, Miami could definitely win that football game with the way that their offense is set up. But I like SMU as a better all-around football program, in particular what they're doing on that defensive line right now. Then Alabama is one of those teams, had they not had the loss to Vanderbilt, we would be picking them to win the SEC right now with the way that they've played outside of that football game for the most part. But here this past week had a huge win against LSU. I think that they're getting better as the season goes on under a new coaching regime. Of course, Nick Saban leaving. Kalen DeBoer coming in. I think that this team is starting to respond to Kalen DeBoer a little bit better now than they have all season for the most part. And then Penn State at number 10. I really hate that Penn State got the schedule that they've gotten this year because I think that they would they would win some other Big Ten matchups if they had a tougher schedule. But when you look at the loss to Ohio State, they should win out from here on out and be 11-1 going into the end of the year, and that still might keep them out of the college football playoff race, which is tough to swallow. It's tough to say, but who's their big win? I mean, Illinois. There's just not a big win, which the College Football Playoff Committee has proven time and time again that they really value those big wins. And I don't know. I don't see it on their schedule at this point. But all you can do is win out, try to get some style points, look decisive in those wins moving forward. They did that this past week. They just got to, just keep winning and keep your fingers crossed, because it's going to be a tight race here at the end of the season to make the college football playoff.
Yeah, Michigan not being very good this year in the Big Ten really kind of screwed things up scheduling wise, because I felt like Michigan was kind of that team that was interwoven into a lot of these Big Ten contenders schedules, right? And then Michigan comes out this year and just falls flat on their face, and I feel like it really put a damper on some of these Big Ten schedules that we were all really excited for. As the Big Ten was able to add some big name brands to the league there, and I don't know, it just feels like we're kind of missing out on some matchups, and then some of the biggest teams other than Ohio State and Oregon weren't able to play each other. But have no fear, Indiana will play Ohio State next week, so we'll certainly be talking about that one. And speaking of Indiana, we've got them ranked number four this week in the Week 12 top 25. We talked about what we saw out of Indiana this past week against Michigan. Not the best second half, right? 3 points mustered there in the second half, and that was at the end of the fourth there, as you're able to kick a field goal and kind of put this thing on ice. The defense continues to look dominant. We've seen just a little tiny chink, I guess you could say, in the armor, right? This past week, but Michigan does have the propensity to be able to stop the run, and that was Indiana's issue in the second half. They weren't able to run the football really for the whole game. 40 total yards rushing, but and the longest rush that Michigan allowed Indiana in that game was 13 yards. So that's a big part of what Indiana does. They're a balanced attack, run and pass, and that's what teams are going to try to do from here on out. They're going to try to take something away from this Indiana group and get them in obvious fill in the blank situations, passing situations, or obvious situations, special teams wise, and defensively. That's look, all the films out in the world, right? Indiana's developing a target on their back at this point, headed into the end of the Big Ten season. So we'll see how that team responds to that. And I think we saw a little bit of that this weekend as Michigan was able to keep it competitive in the second half. But at this point, we talked about it in the reaction show, just win, baby. That's all it takes right now is just winning. From here on out, if you're Indiana, it doesn't matter if you win every game by 3 points or 30. It doesn't matter. You just got to keep winning. And that's a beautiful, beautiful sight to behold if you're a Hoosiers fan here in the 2024 season. What a magical season it's been. And Kurt Cignetti's got to be front runner for Coach of the Year for sure. All right, backtrack just a hair. Tennessee at number 5. Gaston Moore comes in, fills in for Nico, as Nico had some type of upper body injury. You Tennessee fans, let me know in the comment section what's going on with Nico. I'd like to know. Obviously we're going to get a injury report this week at some point, and we'll probably figure out a little bit more, but you can only learn so much from those things. So you folks close to that fan base, you let me know what's going on with Nico and James Pierce as well, who went down in that game. So I'm interested to see what happened with those guys, but it was a ho-hum victory for the Volunteers over Mississippi State, as Tennessee's getting ready to head on the road to Athens, Georgia, and it's a rivalry game, man. It's Georgia, Tennessee. We're going to talk about that game on Tuesday, so make sure y'all come hang out with us Tuesday night. We'll be breaking that one down in full. Huge, 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 just absolutely huge game. Texas at number 3. I just thought Texas looked real good this week. Look, the Texas secondary is really, really good. This defense is better than I thought for Texas. Okay. We talked about in the offseason, what was the secondary going to look like? It's a bit reconstructed. Well, I would say that it was a successful mission through the transfer portal this past season, going and getting Makuba, just answering some questions there that we had over the last couple of years, which was that secondary. The edges seem really good for Texas. The linebacker core is obviously very good. Anthony Hill's a really nice piece. I'm interested to see, if a dynamic running attack be able to attack this Texas team. I'm interested to see maybe what Texas A&M's able to do at the end of the season. We'll see. But this was a great offensive showing as well. Kind of saw Quinn Ewers getting back on track a little bit. It's been a lull. October wasn't a great month for Quinn Ewers, so see if he can pick it back up in November. Ohio State, we got them slid up to number 2 from number 3 last week. Obviously, with the Georgia loss, Ohio State takes care of business. Not much to glean from this week's performance, I wouldn't say. And I believe, is Ohio State on a bye week this week as well, Mason, headed into that Indiana matchup? Do you know?
I believe so.
Yeah, I don't think Ohio State plays this week. So I think both teams have a bye week this week.
No, no, they've got Northwestern. That's right. So they're on
oh,
a
so
bye, basically.
they're the next best thing. Um, we'll see. Is that at Northwestern, by the way?
Yeah, it is.
Boy, I watched C.J. Stroud go there one year and just absolutely had a damn time. Now, I mean, and just had no business struggling there. So we'll see what happens with Indiana. Yeah, or excuse me, with Northwestern in that game. The reason I bring this up, Northwestern, they're sorry as hell. So don't get me wrong here, guys. But when you go to Northwestern, you sometimes deal with the Great Lakes winds, right? And it can be pretty nasty. And here we are in November. It's been a mild winter for most of us here down south. I don't know what it's been like up there, but telling you right now, winter hits a little different at Northwestern. And I they've got some stuff going on with their stadium right now. I'm not sure what to glean from that, so I want to look more into that just a little bit, just for betting purposes on Thursday. But maybe an under is in order. And then number 1, you've got Oregon. We've tooted the Oregon horn week in and week out here. They've been number 1 on our list since they beat Ohio State, and unless Oregon flat out loses a football game, they've earned some grace. You can bring up the Idaho game from early in the season. Maybe you could kind of bring up the Boise State game from earlier in the season and kind of say, not great here, not great. That was 10 weeks ago at this point. We haven't seen that Oregon again. And I feel like I've seen teams show up prepared to play Oregon, and I feel like Oregon is just on a mission, right? They're very, very, very consistent, and they just keep chopping, which was kind of a mantra that Dan Lanning had there at Georgia, and it seems like he's carried it over and putting his spin on everything there in Eugene. He's doing a fantastic job and doing a lot better managing the clock and managing the game and things this year. So I've seen growth from Dan Lanning. I've seen growth from this team. I think there's a great staff in place. They're my favorite to win the national championship right now. But that's subject to change, and I can change my mind if I want to, because anything can happen in college football, and we still got to get through the end of this season, right? Injury free and things like that. So, what do you think about the top 5? I think a lot of people, Tennessee fans, would probably say maybe Tennessee should be number 4. With their SEC schedule. It's debatable. It's debatable. Indiana doesn't have any great wins over top 5 teams or anything, but they beat the stew out of everybody they've played for the most part, other than this past weekend.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, looking at Oregon, I think this might be the number 1 team in the country that we've talked least about for the past 5 years or something like that. I mean, it seems like, and I don't mean on the college football or on the First and Long College Football show that we've talked very little about Oregon, but from a national college football fan perspective, I guess it seems like Oregon's just kind of been put on the back burner for whatever reason, which is a little bit odd. But given their schedule, I also kind of get it. They really hadn't played anybody since Ohio State, so maybe that has something to do with it. But when I look at Oregon, I mean, I think that this is this is a scary team, not just for 2024, but for seasons beyond that. I mean, their NIL pocketbook is as big as anyone in the country's. I think that they've got the best head coach in college football given their age. In a young coach in Dan Lanning, and he's got a pretty young offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator behind him. They do a lot of really creative things, which I think is very intriguing for recruits who want to come into that program and play this new style of football. They are not afraid to go for it on 4th and 10 if they have to or just want to, it seems like. We've seen some fake punts. We saw that this past week. They do some creative things on special teams to line up and try to block kicks. I'm just really impressed with the ingenuity that I've seen from this Oregon team on both sides of the football. I think they're getting really creative on offense and kind of creating this innovative style of college football that is really fun to watch. They're a threat moving forward. I think that they're looking at in this new era of college football, putting together as close as what any team can to a dynasty, given the parity that exists in college football. This is a team that I think is going to be elite for years to come. Looking at Ohio State, look, you drop the one game to Oregon, but you come back, beat Penn State in a close game. They definitely have the roster to win a national championship. I think that they are very deserving of the number 2 spot here this week. I thought the offense looked a little bit better against Purdue. I mean, if any team is a get-right team for your offense, I think Purdue is that team. So not a whole lot to glean from there. You're not going to have a whole lot to glean from against Northwestern. And then you've got Indiana, who's resting this week, that is going to be coming into town, handle business against Indiana. And you're looking at a rematch against Oregon in the Big Ten championship. Just win, baby. Like you said, we're at that time of the season where we can say that about a lot of these teams, including Texas. Texas, look, pretty much for Texas, they have a couple of pretty easy games. I mean, playing Arkansas is not going to be a pushover this week by any stretch. But I think you get over Arkansas and then, face a Texas A&M team who looked really good against LSU and then turned around and laid flat on their face against South Carolina. You got to be looking at Texas A&M thinking that you've got an advantage there. But you got to beat an Arkansas team that's got a really good offense that can match up with you on the offensive side of the football. So it'll be interesting to watch, but I like what I saw out of Texas this past week and their offense finally getting things going and getting things back on track. Isaiah Bond coming back, I think, is a huge part of that as well. Yeah. Looking at Indiana, they're going to be on a bye this week. Coming off of the Michigan win, I think was probably the best thing for this program. And what I mean by that is, you struggle, I would say, for the first time this season, realistically. You struggle in a football game, you still get the win, and now you got a bye week to get better and to go face easily your biggest game of the season. To go to Ohio State, they don't get the rest, so they don't get to get everybody healthy and all that. But can Cignetti get this team back going, back playing, dominant football? It's going to be a tough test against Ohio State in a couple of weeks, but I still like the Hoosiers in that one for the most part. And then Tennessee at number 5 got a tough matchup going to Athens this week. Not a great matchup for the Vols, but they're playing good football. Only lost to that Arkansas team that we mentioned is going to be facing Texas this week, and I think that Tennessee's just got to find something on offense. Love their defense right now. Absolutely love their defense. Actually, their defense matches up similar to Ole Miss's defense, which we saw give Georgia fits this past week. So maybe Tennessee can head down to Athens and sneak out a win. I have to think that if they aren't able to do that, they are out of the college football playoff hunt at that point, considering, Georgia will have the head-to-head against them, and assuming both teams end up with 2 losses at the end of the year, Georgia would obviously get that nod there. But I really like the Vols. I don't think that, you can pencil in Georgia with a W in that game by any stretch. but anxious to see what their offense brings to the table this week with Nico, if he's able to go. Dylan Sampson, is he going to be able to run against this Georgia front? It'll be a really interesting game, and I don't know that there's been a bigger matchup when it comes to college football playoff implications outside of maybe the Alabama LSU team game that we just watched yesterday. That one is going to be absolutely massive between Tennessee and Georgia this weekend.
No doubt about it. We'll be talking about that game Tuesday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. I hope all of you will come and join us. If you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, I hope that you'll consider doing that now.